Is Bitcoin Core sabotaging or even killing BTC, the asset that we all love? Are the core maintainers of Bitcoin compromised? This might just be the most interesting story happening in Bitcoin in 2026. Bitcoin Core versus Bitcoin Knots, the new fork wars after 2017, where the BSV guys have forked off Bitcoin. Now we have a new two camps. We have Bitcoin Core and we have Bitcoin Knots. And now Bitcoin Knots is not only rising rapidly in popularity, we also have a new BIP 110, a proposal to change Bitcoin, a soft fork as it is called. I invited one of the leading voices in the Bitcoin Knots camp, Bitcoin Mechanic. We spent the whole podcast answering all your questions around Bitcoin Knots, Bitcoin Core, and the BIP 110 debate. And yes, it got quite spicy. Enjoy. Who are you and why are you excited about Bitcoin in the first place?
I'm in Bitcoin because I see money as a very powerful tool and it's used against the majority of the people in the world as a kind of weaponization of a tool. So Bitcoin is a way of separating the money from the state. It's a technical solution to a problem of people and their corruptibility, the temptation to print money, all the evils that come with that, theft, property rights being respected, being very difficult to undermine because of the nature of cryptography, and decentralization, meaning that rules are very hard to change. And if they are to change, they change in a way that comes from the bottom rather than the top. I like these things. Everything about Bitcoin always appealed to me. It's very natural. It fits with my character and my ideology. So when I discovered it, I immediately thought this is great. And I've never felt any other way about it. Really, every year it gets deeper and deeper.
Do you think that all those attributes like the decentralization, all of those things are now stronger or less strong than, I don't know, like 5-6 years ago?
Good question. I think it's sort of cyclical. It waxes and wanes like the moon. It does have trends within that, of course, but right now you're seeing a massive recalibration of network dynamics, where there's sort of an ambivalent, huge industry that has kind of allowed Bitcoin to fall into disrepair, that combines with the trusted developers that have been at the helm for years. You've kind of this check or balance that exists by virtue of the node software that the users actually choose to run, suddenly massively shifted away from the default implementation, which is core. And suddenly there was a mass migration away from that to an alternative. And that alternative is now enforcing a rule change, a soft fork called BIP 110. And that is the network reasserting itself and saying, well, actually, this is our network. And the various people that feel ambivalent towards their change are presumably going to be swept up within that at some point, because the network must reconverge on a cohesive set of rules. So I'd say I've never really been... stuff started going really wrong a couple of years ago, and the way in which the network is correcting those problems has made me never more proud to be a part of it or more impressed with the resilience it's shown. It's not things going wrong, right? It's how you react to them and how you deal with them. And the way Bitcoin deals with issues, like what happens if a massive exchange goes, gets hacked and completely dies, like Mt. Gox. Oh, okay, we dealt with that incredibly well, actually. And what happens if the guy, that most people considered the successor to Satoshi, which is Gavin Andresen, what happens if he's pushing for a change that's a really bad idea? Isn't he in control of the project? Well, no, we route around him as well, and he gets ousted. All right, well, what happens if, there are millions of things that are very similar to Bitcoin on the surface, and they're being pushed more aggressively? Won't they take over? Nope, we dealt with that as well. And then you have that question, the final question. Well, what happens if all of the developers go rogue, or most of the developers go rogue? How do you deal with that? And I think that's the situation we're kind of in now. And I've watched so many people say, all right, well, I've been running Bitcoin Core for well over 10 years. I guess I have to run something else now. And that's no light decision. That's a very heavy decision for people to make. And they did. And for me, that's, it means something. And like I said, if it wasn't for this reaction, then I would be very unimpressed. But it's a living organism of sorts. It responds to stimulus, and when it's under attack, assuming it modifies things and defends itself, that makes me think, okay, it's alive and healthy. Because Bitcoin 10 is like an inflammatory response to some kind of pathogen in your body. And it's, saying, all right, well, there's arbitrary data here and arbitrary data there. We're going to rip them out, make them impossible for a year. It's done that in a very it's drawing very black and white lines around certain ways of putting in arbitrary data in Bitcoin that are apparently now endorsed. And it's doing that in a way. It's doing that in a temporary way, because it's not a long-term solution, but it works for the short term. And that's exactly like an inflammatory response of like an alive organism, because an alive organism doesn't want to live in a permanently inflamed state, but it also has something that it needs to deal with right now. So that to me all speaks to a very healthy network, and a very dormant industry that is very ambivalent. Before, we had power struggles back in 2017, the famous fork wars, block size wars. Then you had actual war between two different sides. You had, the industry, which wanted to push big blocks, and, a modified version of the fork we wanted. And you had the users, or the community, the end users, the people that ultimately control everything, who wanted to keep blocks small and to have SegWit as a soft fork. And ultimately they won. In the current situation, the war isn't really, it's much more one-sided. You have a community that passionately wants to do something like BIP110, or just BIP110, and you have an industry that is completely uninterested in going to war with them. The industry is ambivalent, and is going to be led. It increasingly appears is just going to be led by the community that is going to start enforcing a rule within about a month. So it's the beginning of July now, and around the first week of August at the very latest, this rule will become enforced, where initially miners have to flip a bit that signals readiness for BIP110, and then after that, new rules come into effect temporarily that make it so that big op returns and certain things within Taproot are no longer possible for a year.
There is so many different avenues. I think I hope everyone knows what a Bitcoin node is. Just like, if you don't, just quickly ask Claude or ChatGPT, because I think it's important for that discussion to like understand the rudimentary of like what is a Bitcoin miner, what is a node, and all of that. Just as a thing for people listening to that. Is it generally a good thing if there are more implementations than one that are popular, like the more implementation that have, let's say, over 10% of the network? Or can it be also a bad thing if there is too many, like almost like in political systems, like is it better to have like one dominant force, or is it better to have like 3-4 that kind of have together 80% of the network?
It's too complicated to say better or worse. There isn't really anything better than having one implementation with a benevolent team that are integrated. They are highly motivated to make Bitcoin work as well as it can. They have a lot of Bitcoins themselves. They're somewhat immune to corruption somehow, just by virtue of wanting to make sure their stash remains as valuable as possible. Unfortunately, Bitcoin is so big now that it's very relevant in the political sphere, and it's open to the same corruption as anything else that has reached that kind of scale. It's not going to fly under the radar anymore, where we can all hold each other to account and everything is very easy to spot and very transparent. It's so big, and there's so much emotional charge to everything now that most of the core development stuff that started happening behind closed doors, because they just don't want to get ripped to pieces, because half the time they would get attacked in an unfair way. So I understand that. And you get these small pockets and these cliques within the development community where people feel comfortable with each other. They have good personal relationships, and they don't want to have to spend their life fighting with anonymous people who are furious with them. So most of them kind of became quite withdrawn, and that is very antithetical to the open source spirit of things. And it just kind of, it's not a particularly sustainable way to do things. Having multiple implementations, however, as an antidote for that, has its own problems too. And Satoshi famously said, that sounds like a nightmare. And it is a nightmare, because if there's a bug in one of them but not the other one, what do? You get accidental chain splits. And that happened within Bitcoin Core itself at one point, because two different versions of it, one had a bug and the other one didn't. And that caused an accidental chain split back in 2013. And things like that are really difficult to fix, because you've got 10 minutes really to fix it before a lot of money is on the table. So those situations are avoided by, if there's a bug in Bitcoin Core, but everyone uses Bitcoin Core, at least we all agree on something having gone wrong. But when you have multiple implementations, that's less true. So you do have intermediary things, which is the main thing everyone's migrated to away from Core. That is just downstream of Core. It's not a re-implementation from scratch written according to a spec that doesn't exist in a new programming language by a different team. All the code in it is written by the core developers for the most part. It just changes. It serves as a check or balance on the dominant implementation, but now it's kind of reached the point where it's become divorced from the parent implementation, because there's too much difference between the two of them to be reconcilable. So the assumption is that we just hopefully end up with Core as the new benevolent thing that is run by everyone, because that's the only option they're going to have come August if things happen the way I'm expecting. And that is not an ideal scenario at all. It's going to need expanding. It's going to need a lot of procedural, bootstrapping. And Luke is obviously Luke Dasher, who's been maintaining knots for a very long time. He doesn't have a team the size of what is working on Bitcoin Core. There are multiple developers working on it. The common thing is that he's the only developer on it, which is not true at all. But the point is, there would still be way too big of a spotlight shining at him. Then it would be very uncomfortable. He's already been targeted and had his life savings stolen from him just because of the position he occupies, and the controversial character he is means people do come after him and attack him a lot. So it's not ideal for him to be put in even greater a position of having a bit even larger target on his back. So we're in a very funny situation with regard to governance of implementation stuff. Bitcoin is weird. It doesn't have a spec. It's not like Lightning, where there's a spec and then you have different implementations that comply with the spec. Bitcoin never had a spec. It just is whatever Bitcoin Core said it was, essentially. And then now you don't just have that anymore. Let me check the node stats. According to bitdis.org, there's around 5,000 nodes running the latest version of Knots, and around 5,000 nodes running the latest version of Core. So it's a 50-50 split, but I think that's a little misleading. I think if you go further down, the second stat is that Bitcoin Knots has around 5,700 nodes running a recent version of nods, and around 11,500 running a recent version of core. So you're looking at about a 1/3 to 2/3 split between knots and core. And obviously, the BIP 10 implementation of knots, which is the very recent version of it, has less than the total knots users, and that's around 4,500 nodes. Now, these are just listening nodes, I should say. There are a lot more nodes on the network than 4,000 enforcing a new fork, and 11,000 not yet acknowledging its existence, but fundamentally running an insecure node come August. That whole thing is, it needs to be reconciled. And I think there are constant conversations about it. There's various funding organizations being bootstrapped at the moment. Developers have already started getting grants. Things are coming together, but it's open source, and it is necessarily quite chaotic, and people do need to become comfortable with that, especially if they're coming from a corporate environment where things are very hierarchical. And but I do think you do have, the template for me is always Linux, which is Linus Torvald. Basically, one guy gave us Linux, essentially, and his knowledge and integrity as a person has led to this amazing thing, this operating system, which should never have been possible, that runs the back end of the entire planet at this point. Everyone is using Linux in some way in their life, all day, every day, without whether or not they realize it. All the servers they interact with, whenever they use anything digital, the back end of it is probably running Linux. And it's basically just one human, and there is no procedural or bureaucratic solution that could ever replicate that. When he dies, Linux probably dies with him, because you just can't have something like that without that kind of human with that kind of vision. So that's often been what Luke has been to Bitcoin. And that, again, I'm not trying to advocate making him benevolent dictator of Bitcoin for life. I'm just pointing out that so much of the critical periods in Bitcoin's history have benefited from his stewardship. But it's not realistic to maintain. He needs to become less of a target, not more of a target. And hopefully there's a way of actually doing that. But it all requires good faith participation by incentivized people who want Bitcoin to succeed.
We Bitcoiners always preach not your keys, not your coins, but we're giving away all our data to the big tech servers. Your passwords, your identity, your accounts. That's why I personally switched away and started using Proton Pass. Everything is end-to-end encrypted, so not Proton and not anyone else can read your data. And look how simple this is. I just click here once on the login button, and I automatically get the passkey sign-in from Proton. With just one click on it, I'm signed in. And of course, it also stores all the two-factor authentication codes. And if my credentials ever show up in a data breach, it warns me so I can act very fast. If you care about holding your own Bitcoin, you should also care about holding the control of your own data. It's the same fight. And the best part is, you're not sacrificing your convenience. It's privacy and security by default, and you can start for free right now. And if you want to upgrade to Proton Plus, you get that for just $1 for your first month. Link is in the description and in the pinned comment down below. So go to proton.me/pass/Robin Seyr. Make sure you close your digital front door. It takes you 5 minutes and €0 to start with. Again, that's proton.me/pass/Robin Seyr.
Yeah, like as you said, Knots has been around. Luke has been working on Knots since way longer time than it is in our Bitcoin community consciousness. I would say, like people didn't talk about Knots in like 2018 or like 2020 or something like that as much as they do right now. What do you think is the trigger? Like, what was the main thing that made Knots all of a sudden way more popular? I talked with many people, and the people that run Knots, they were not happy with core since a way longer time than just like recent months or years.
Yeah. The timeline of events was roughly Taproot got activated, and all this time NOTs was less than 1%. Taproot got activated. Casey Rodamore figures out a way to use Taproot to bypass the existing spam filters and upload gratuitous amounts of arbitrary data in reveal transactions, where you would have fake script that took advantage of the witness discount in order to fill up blocks with absolute garbage, essentially. And this happened late 2022, early 2023. Very quickly, there was an upgrade proposed to the existing spam filters, i.e. data carrier size, saying, hey, we need to filter this new type of spam. And the pushback we got was mainly from the people who were selling NFTs using this garbage, with this way of inserting garbage into Bitcoin. And that pushback created controversy, and obviously the pull request was into Bitcoin Core itself, upgrade the spam filters. And this was the whole fix the filters movement that ran for a couple of years. It was closed as controversial and ignored, and generally just said, look, this isn't going to work. And there was even some new narratives around it saying, if Bitcoin tries to minimize arbitrary data storage, then that's censorship. And this had never been said before. That was a new concept, right? And it came from Peter Todd largely. Back around the beginning, of course, there were discussions. How do you stop people uploading arbitrary data to Bitcoin? It was never, oh, should we do that? Isn't that censorship? It was never that. It was always understood that it was a protocol, a money protocol, and the blockchain contents would be financial history. It's a ledger. It's not supposed to be there to store pictures and things like that. It was never an ideological faux pas. And so that changed in 2023, but we didn't see any adoption of NOTs particularly. It still stayed below 1%, and there was just disillusionment with core. Why didn't you fix the filters? Your excuse seems a little bit, mistaken. It invokes an ideological concern that doesn't make any sense. There's nothing wrong with a monetary protocol trying to minimize data storage, because it's not what it's for. That's just protocol design. That's engineering. It's not political. It's not targeting people. It's targeting efficient use case of a protocol. So anyway, that was 2023. But NOTs adoption still had barely happened, but that was the birth of the monetary maxi movement. People saying, well, Bitcoin, apparently now we must assert and ratify that this protocol is a monetary protocol. It's not supposed to be used for other things. And the extent to which it can be used for other things is the extent to which it sucks. And the analogy was made by Canute. Houses are great until they get used as a proxy for storing value. And people do use them to store value because they can't store value in their currency because it's been debased. This is why people say Bitcoin fixes this with regard to property prices, because they say if people can store their value and purchasing power in money itself, they don't need to buy houses anymore. And then house pricing market corrects. So houses are worse as a tool for providing people with shelter because they cost more than they should because of a distortion of the market. And that same thing happens in Bitcoin. If Bitcoin is worse as money because its utility is being expanded to do other things that no one has an incentive, no one is incentivized in the same way to maintain rigorous fidelity to, then you degrade it as a monetary system. So that was the principle of the monetary maxis. They typically ran NOTs. A guy called Leo showed up who started packaging up NOTs for all the various node boxes, like Start9 primarily, which is my favorite, and I used to work there, disclaimer. Umbrel, which is very widely used. MyNode, Raspberry Blitz, Parma Node gets a special shout out because he's been had a lot of integrity throughout this whole thing, and a couple of other implementations too. But still, user base was less than 1%. 2023 happens. We're disillusioned with core. Why aren't they fighting against arbitrary data anymore? Why are they saying that would be censorship? What's happened to these people? Are they compromised? These kinds of allegations start flying. Personal attacks start flying against some of the core developers. There's people start digging into it. People who've never even looked at the code base before are like, okay, so who is Fanquake? Who is A Chow? Who is Gloria? And they've never even looked into this stuff before. Are they really the world's best developers? Are they really operating transparently? These questions start emerging. 2024 happens. And then, I mean, that's just continuation of the same thing. Monetary maxis is lying fairly dormant at that point, but it's running knots. It's very small. It's a couple hundred people at most, and the Dunbar number is not exceeded. We all know each other by first name, or by NIM. And, we're all very familiar with each other. It's quite rare. You run into one or two of them at a conference. Then early 2025 happens, and suddenly this pull request is made by Peter Todd into Bitcoin Core to take data carrier size in its already broken state and blow it up from 83 bytes to unlimited, essentially, so that op return sizes would go from 83 bytes as standard. They can always be bigger than that by consensus, but there was always a standard policy limiting them to 83 bytes, which had been, for 99.9% of Bitcoin's history, had been enough to contain op returns to within that size. Sorry, I phrased that wrongly. I'm saying 99.9% of op returns were within that limit. And it went from 83 effectively all the way up to 100,000, which was the next spam filter that would limit them. And, that's an 1,250x increase of a variable that's been there since 2014. And this was suddenly seen as crazy. People are like, all right, now you're actively trying to welcome in more arbitrary data to Bitcoin. And the same, ship show, if I can put it in family-friendly terms, happened on GitHub as it did when we tried to fix the filters 2 years prior. The same thing happened, controversial, people yelling at each other, people with financial interests in making it larger, accusing us of censorship and for wanting to reduce arbitrary data in Bitcoin. That happened, and this blew knots up. So this was around April 2025, and suddenly it went from under 1% to over 10% in about a month. I might be misremembering the time frame a little bit, but it was that period. And suddenly Knots was like, oh, this is a real implementation now. And lots of people, it had always been real, but a lot of people were like, I have to run this now. Core are no longer passively allowing Bitcoin to get worse. They're actively trying to make it worse. I made a video saying Bitcoin Core actively sabotaging Bitcoin, and my channel had never had anything like that kind of engagement before. Lots of people watched that video. Lots of people agreed. And that was the beginning of the current civil war, really, that point, because they merged the pull request, not that exact one, but that exact one got closed, and then a new one got opened that did essentially the same thing. And that one ended up getting merged by Gloria, who became the unfortunately became basically the scapegoat, I would say, because she gets most of the hate out of any of the core developers. She got attacked more than anyone else, but she also was the one that was foolish enough to kind of say the quiet part out loud, the quiet disdain that Bitcoin Core had for Bitcoiners who are typically ideologically very different from people that go to live on the coasts of America and go to those kinds of leftist institutions to study computer science. They're very at odds ideologically with Bitcoiners who are quite typically Austrian economists, right-wing in orientation. And I think the left-right divide is stupid, but it's very present in a lot of these discussions. I do think you genuinely have people with conservative temperaments and liberal temperaments, and but people just kept it about the code and about Bitcoin. But Gloria would always come out and just puke all this stuff on people and just be like, yeah, Bitcoin is a complete morons. I think you're all stupid fools and you're all redneck carnivore idiots, like narrow-minded. Like, she'd come out with all these things that it's like, we know that the culture within Core thinks that about its user base, but no one else is actually saying it. So she came out and said it and got used as the scapegoat. People were like, look, you can't work on this project if you have no respect for the user base. No one's going to treat you with any respect back. And you seem to be a junior level developer and potentially a DEI hire. And that's against all of the principles we stand for. We want to think highly of our devs, and we want them to be heavily invested in Bitcoin's success. We don't want them to be fooling around blockchain enthusiasts, that are interested in it for some coding reasons who aren't taking it seriously at all. So she got violently ejected from the community soon after merging that thing. And as I said, I apologized that she got used as a scapegoat, because really the whole culture of development in that part of this whole project is really rotten, and she just exposed it. I feel like she was not responsible for it. She just didn't have the life experience to know that you kind of have to keep some things quiet. So anyway, Knots was growing. It started really skyrocketing in 2025. Then the hope was that they wouldn't merge this PR. They eventually did merge the PR and made op returns, much larger by standard relay policy in Core 30. Core 30 got released with that. It was the top of the bull market. I think it was the all-time high of Bitcoin's price, around $125,000, and we've been going down ever since then. The Core 30 also had a bug where it would delete some people's wallets upon migration, and this was the first time it forced migration. So it was a very unlucky release. I didn't bash them too hard about the wallet deletion thing, because accidents happen. But generally, about everything went wrong that could go wrong. And Bitcoin's been in kind of reeling and on the floor since that happened. And Core's Knots adoption has been going up since. And soon, just to round all this off, sorry for the length of all this, once that pull request was merged and Core 30 was released, it became pretty clear that there was going to be a soft fork that would emerge to limit what has just been made possible or made officially possible, and the things it cited as rationale, these now standardized big ways of putting in large amounts of arbitrary data, needed to be made impossible again, just to grab the steering wheel and get Bitcoin back on course as a monetary network rather than a data storage platform with no incentive for people that would ultimately be tasked with storing all your data forever. And that emerged late last year. Dathan Ohm, the history of it, Portland Hodl proposed on the mailing list a solution for poison blocks. Luke dovetailed off of it and went, well, why don't we limit other things too? And made it so that there's you basically close down all the known mechanisms at the moment of adding large amounts of arbitrary data to Bitcoin. So it amounts to limiting op return at the consensus level, as well as putting guardrails on Taproot, because Taproot basically opened up a bunch of stuff that wasn't possible before 2021. So that soft fork emerged. It looked utterly ridiculous, and every day has looked slightly less ridiculous. And that's how it goes with soft forks. That's how it was in 2017. Shaolin Fry released BIP 48. It looked ridiculous. Eventually it won. That's how BIP 10 looks too. And it's been, 7-8 months now. It's about 9 months actually. And it's set to activate next month at the latest. So it's almost there now. It has a massive amount of community adoption. It doesn't have any of the pushback people say it does. They would be very annoyed about me saying that, because they know who they are. They know they're against it, and they know plenty of people like them. But nothing they do is of Bitcoin's concern. No one has run a counter fork, which is what you need to do to resist soft forks properly. And none of the industry that isn't in favor of it actually cares enough to oppose it. So that to me spells success. And some of the metrics I used to compare it to 2017 tell me that it's probably going to activate without a hitch at this point. But we practice humility, and we know that we can't know the outcome. So we have around 5 weeks left before a decisive line is drawn, whether we're going with the permissive route to turn Bitcoin into a kind of Ethereum style system where it's just a platform for whatever goes without any clear direction or purpose. But you can be sure there's lots of scamming and opportunism and pump and dumps. Or you go the other route, which is optimization for a specific purpose and a continued vigilant battle that never ends, trying to keep Bitcoin self-congruent. You can only go in one direction at once, and I'm pretty sure that the network's going to choose the latter.
I want to come back to the timeline a little bit later, because I think it's very interesting. But you mentioned the price, which I actually looked at that as well, because as a podcaster, you constantly get asked about the price, the conversations around price doing better than the conversations without the price talk. Like price is like a very important topic in the Bitcoin media, even though like Bitcoiners often kind of want to get rid of, like they want to focus on the freedom aspects, they want to focus on the real things while we're here. Do you think that the Bitcoin price actually suffered or has something to do with the civil war that we are currently living through?
I know that it's helpful for me if it does, because it helps. The more the price drops as a result of the core actions I dislike, the more I get the confirmation that Bitcoiners are on the side I'm on and they dislike the change. But I also just think price does what it does, and people always backwards rationalize on causes. Like, it's the 4-year cycle as well. Like, it started falling around when it usually falls. Like, it's pretty spot on. It's Bitcoin moves in 4-year cycles, and every cycle people think we will break that cycle. And there's even a part of the cycle where people start saying this cycle is different, and like it's part of the cycle. So I don't know. I think it's definitely part of it. I think it can also be a divine sense of humor, which is, of course, Core would ultimately release the most hated version of Core in existence the day the price goes from being in a bull market to a very, very obvious bear market, where we've now lost, I think we've lost more than 50% of the fiat valuation, right? So that's a big drop. That's not a trivial drop, given the relative maturity Bitcoin has versus, prior cycles where an 80% drop is kind of expected given its size. But Bitcoin's pretty big now. It shouldn't be having that kind of volatility. So I definitely think you can put some of it down to Core. I think you can put some of it down to the 4-year cycle. And I think you can also put some of it down to people buying junk stocks instead of Bitcoin itself, because, every cycle it's, I like Bitcoin, buy my shitcoin. That's a very, very common theme that we see, and that has been the Treasury stocks this time. You have these very influential, very extremely worshipped people in the space, namely Adam Back and Michael Saylor, and people worship the ground these guys walk on, and they are pushing Treasury stocks. They are not pushing Bitcoin, and Treasury stocks are ultimately a diluted way to buy Bitcoin. It's money is getting leaked out. It's a less efficient way of purchasing Bitcoins in every capacity. So you can believe it's all one-to-one if you like, but it doesn't even, that is not even to say that Michael Saylor's holding a bunch of paper fake Bitcoin. Even if it's all real, though he's never provided any proof, there's still just so much waste. $100 put into MicroStrategy is not the same as buying $100 worth of Bitcoin and withdrawing it from an exchange. They're not the same thing. So you've got all this waste now that's causes price attrition, I think, that's definitely contributed to a price being lower than where you'd expect it to be around this point. But it's not much lower than I'd expect. And frankly, not to be an opportunist, I like the lower price, because the lower the price, the better the ratio of hardcore Bitcoiners is to tourists. And the better that ratio is, the more resilient the network. And to go back to your first question, how's Bitcoin faring in terms of decentralization? It's not about how many cypherpunks there are running Bitcoin. It's about the ratio of them to normies, because Bitcoin is healthy with 1,000 cypherpunks and no one else. But it's not healthy with 10,000 cypherpunks and 1 million looky-loo tourists that leave all their, that buy a bunch of Treasury stocks or something. That's not healthy, because the ratio is way out of whack. You need enough paranoid crypto anarchists, as Saylor calls us, for the system to actually be resilient. So bear markets improve that ratio radically. They get rid of all the tourists and they leave the hardcore people behind. And those hardcore people are the ones who build the actual resiliency into the system. And they do such a good job that it attracts a new wave of tourists that creates the next bull market. It's basically the hard times create strong men create good times. That whole adage.
Yeah, very, very true. And I think this is a very good point, because no matter if, like, I see so many people comparing Bitcoin and MSTR, and I think it's just not a fair comparison. It's just like two very different things. Like you cannot compare Bitcoin to a security. It's just like, why would you even do that? Just because they both have a ticker and go up and down in price. But yeah, beyond that topic, there are people that, and even I'm kind of in that camp, that hate what Core was doing, but are cautious around PIP 110. So they run nodes, but they're cautious around forks. They're cautious around doing that. What are you saying to them? Well, like, why is PIP 110 beyond nodes important?
Sorry, what kind of person are you speaking about exactly? They run both or neither, or
No, they run nodes. They hate Core, but they're cautious around PIP 110.
Oh yeah. So I mean, yeah, there are those people. Unfortunately, I don't know exactly how to reconcile that one. There is the idea of a third implementation entirely, which is Samson Mao and Jimmy Song's production ready, but despite its name, it doesn't exist as far as I can tell, and it certainly won't have any relevance in the upcoming fork because it's too close to us. If you dislike BIP 110, unfortunately, you are obliged to URSF it at this point. The current consensus rules I mean, there's lots of consensus rules, and most people don't feel strongly about any of them. I don't care that it is 21 million. I do care that it can't be changed, of course, but it's not like I really needed to see that number was 21 million before I agreed to enforce it. I have to enforce it in order to participate in the network directly. Everything else, block size limit, address types, whatever it is that's enforced by consensus. I don't have to love any of these rules, but I do need to realistically and practically enforce the same ones that everyone else does. Otherwise, I'm not going to have a network anymore. You're not, if you're running knots prior to a version of knots that doesn't enforce BIP 110, then you're just going to be in an incongruent state where you're running some of the functionality of a Bitcoin node. That, to be clear, that does work to some extent, and you can get by like that, but it's not a coherent way for a business to operate because they're not running a fully validating node anymore. They're taking some of it on trust. And while the consequences for any individual doing that are likely to be pretty minor, if enough people do it, the network stops being functional. Like a mining pool absolutely cannot do that. For example, they will generate block templates that contain transactions that will cause nodes to throw their block away, and there's no reason for them to accidentally do that. So I basically, some of the network dynamics and the fact that you can have minority activated soft forks in Bitcoin are coercive in nature. And Bitcoin has been described by Greg Maxwell in response to the same people over a different mechanism. He describes it as distributed authoritarianism. And I realized I was fine with that. I'm fine with authoritarianism so long as it is the result of a large group of people setting the rules in a way that are provably fair, because they're not going to arbitrarily change. It's bureaucrats I don't like and centralized power. It's not whether the rules are breakable or not. I don't need the rules of Bitcoin to be breakable for me to feel freedom. Bitcoin gives me freedom because people can't rug pull me. That's a very different thing. Bitcoin will actually enforce my property rights stringently. So that's a bit of a tangent. But the point is, the coercive element of it, I've reconciled, and I'm okay with that. Even though there's a minority of us introducing a new rule and we're saying to the people, you have to get with this new rule or you're just not on the network anymore, or you risk forking yourselves off. I'm okay with telling them that because that's what Bitcoin does anyway. And it's fine for Bitcoin to change and update its rules in ways that protect it and ratify its purpose. I'm fine with that. So I would tell those people, The main thing you can do is, one, give the Bitcoin 10 running community solid rationale for why it is you think they're making a mistake, because they don't want to make a mistake. Most of them are hardcore Bitcoiners that if you come at them and tell them a genuine reason why they're making a mistake, they're going to want to hear it. Sure, some of them might get emotional and triggered, and they might call you a retard or whatever, but grow up, deal with the fact that it's a messy conversation and actually have it. The majority of what we're seeing is bad faith arguments against Bitcoin 10. That's the problem. They say it confiscates UTXOs, which it definitely does not. They say you can still get spam in the chain, which is acknowledged in the BIP itself. They say the nodes running it are a Sybil attack because they're completely blind to the community that's manifestly exists. And these are not good arguments. You're not going to persuade people to abandon Bitcoin 10. They say it's a slippery slope to censorship of monetary transactions, but that's not true at all. It's motivated by trying to make Bitcoin function better as money, so that doesn't flip upside down. And they say it's temporary, so you're just going to make it permanent at the end because it's a government measure and there's nothing more permanent than a government measure. But that's not possible. The only reason it has any chance of success is that it's not a bureaucrat or a government. It's lots of people. It's a decentralized network that's actually organically adopting this thing. And they wouldn't, like Matt Odell says, it's me and Luke attempting to take over Bitcoin. And I say it's not, because other people have to voluntarily run this thing. And the only reason they will do that is because it's actually a good idea. Sure, they might trust me and they run it based on that, which puts me in a position where if I'm compromised, it can be used as an attack vector for Bitcoin. But it's not the only factor here. Bitcoin 10 is independently verifiable as a good idea by a lot of people. And even if me and Luke are the worst people in the world out here championing for it, that doesn't change. So it doesn't put us necessarily in a position of power. It definitely gives us influence because of how people operate. They look to other voices that they consider reasonable and good source of signal, and that will help shape their opinion on things. That is how people work. But at the end of the day, you only get to be in that position by being truthful in the first place. So it's not that big of a compromise, and it's a reasonable thing to make. It's not. I'm not saying Knots is perfect, and I'm not saying Bitcoin 10 is perfect. I'm saying that the opposition needs to be meaningful. So I have met people that run Knots. They agree with me about what Core have done, but they think Bitcoin 10 is a bad idea. But they have yet to give me a compelling reason why it's a bad idea. They tend to be advocating for. I mean, Jimmy Song is a good example. He agrees that Core is not a good steward of the protocol anymore, but he thinks Bitcoin 10 is a bad idea. And there are Giacomo also has the same perspective, and these are very respected people in the Bitcoin space. But in my opinion, both of them advocate inactivity and passivity in a circumstance where action is necessary. And that adage, there's two kinds of programming languages. There's programming languages everyone complains about all the time, and there's programming languages no one uses. That's it. So this is what I feel about Bitcoin 10. There are going to be ideas about how we correct the course of the ship, given what's happened with Bitcoin Core. There are going to be two kinds of ideas, ones that everyone complains about and ones that don't exist. That's going to be essentially what you come up with. I'm wide open to a better proposal. People did come to me and say, hey, what if we just did op return? Or what if we did op return and the taproot guardrails, but we made op return permanent and we made the taproot guardrails temporary? Or what if we brought down op return just by policy again, but put something hardcore on top of the taproot things, or went further than just op if? What if we made it more specific to the inscriptions exploit and went op false op if? Like, loads of people have these other ideas, right? Super Testnet had ideas like that. Luke the Wolf had ideas like that. But the thing is, they have no activation client. They have no shelling point to get anywhere with those kinds of ideas. It's just personal preference. And I'm saying, well, then that's naivete about politics itself. Bitcoin 10 is what it is. It has massive grassroots support. It's very close to activating. And that's basically going to be the way we do this. If you have a better idea, it needs to be, it's like, you can reinvent Bitcoin, dude. and you can come up with better variables than Bitcoin had, better function. You can start with Schnorr signatures from the very beginning if you want, but it's not going to work because Bitcoin's good enough. Like, that's Andreas's old thing, right? That's a lot of people would say that, like, Bitcoin is the MySpace of the internet, so we can have a new thing that leapfrogs it and be the Facebook. It's like, no, Bitcoin is the internet itself, which means if you invent a better protocol today, no one's going to use it because the internet is good enough. And that's the same with Bitcoin 10. It's the shelling point, it's the networking effects that matter. Bitcoin 10 is big enough that it's basically going to work. So you would need something unbelievably superior for people to say, oh, all right, I get that. Other than that, it's just complaining. It's, oh, I don't want to do this thing. It's mob rule. Like, I'm scared. Like, that. Again, all of the ideas invoked that I listed off there, they're not straw man. That is the arguments they're making. Giacomo is saying there's a slippery slope to mob rule. If a small group of Bitcoiners can add a consensus rule, then Bitcoin is fundamentally vulnerable in ways that it shouldn't be. And I'm saying it doesn't matter. It is. What you're saying, unfortunately, is just how Bitcoin works. We've done minority soft forks in the past. Another one does not set a new precedent. It's justified. We can do them. We've done them in the past. That's not a real concern. So, yeah, again, real arguments are necessary from the people that I appreciate that we are on the same page with regards to core, but action is required at this point. And if the action we are taking is not acceptable to you, I need a credible alternative. And if it is a credible alternative, and it can genuinely leapfrog Bitcoin 10, I would advocate for it. It's very late in the day to start doing that, and I have been wide open and waited for that. I've not seen it. All I have seen is a call to inaction, which is, yeah, I don't like core, and yeah, I run knots, but let's just carry on complaining about it on social media. And that isn't going to have the effect needed. We have a real problem here. Renaud Curry, I'm saying his name wrong. He released a constant analysis of block contents. I think it was last week. 70% of block space was junk data. That's not optimized correctly. That's a Bitcoin network that is going to fail ultimately. If you do not correct that with a measure that is going to upset people, then you're going to end up complaining about things for a long time, but you're never going to end up in a coherent direction where you can say, all right, let's actually fix this. It's a practical thing. It's a political aspect of organizing large amounts of people and accepting that not everyone gets it exactly the way they want. That's just life. And I apologize to the people that have to reconcile all this stuff, but that's Bitcoin's consensus rules. Eventually you have to just realize I have to enforce the rules everyone else is enforcing, even if I don't love every one of them. It's just Bitcoin.
With Microseed, you can engrave your 12 or 24 word seed phrase, the entire seed phrase, onto a 1-inch small washer. Yes, just one washer. All 24 words on that one washer. You can hide that thing everywhere. And even better, you don't need to buy a new kit every time you have to get a new wallet. You can make unlimited backups because Microseed is not selling the washer. Microseed is selling the device that stamps the washer. So you get the full kit with the device, with the washers, with the hammer, with everything you need to get started today. And you can make with that unlimited amount of backups. Go now to microseed.io. I finally and officially mine Bitcoin. This is not just something to stack more Satoshis, but it's most importantly also to support the network. Individual miners are the ones that keep the Bitcoin network decentralized. And by the way, you get KYC-free Bitcoin. That's why I use Simple Mining. I get an actual proper Bitcoin miner. They set it up for me. They repair it if it breaks down. And most importantly, they let me choose the pool and even connect my own full node. I'm completely sovereign and I'm completely in control. And I can sign up with Ocean, no account needed. I just give them a Bitcoin address and then there's mining going on. No KYC, nothing. So if you're ready to mine Bitcoin, go to simplemining.io, tell them you come from Robin, and let's mine Bitcoin together.
It's a fair argument of like, if you see the problem, you should do something, and if you don't like the solution, come up with another solution. It's like, why complain about something that why complain about something when you don't put on your solution yourself? Like it's like I can complain that the weather today is too hot or too cold, but Like, what do I gain from just complaining? That's a very fair argument.
Everybody complains about the weather, but nobody does anything about it.
There's so many things. Let's get to the timeline. Like, first of all, what happens if the BIP110 activation succeeds? What afterwards? Is there something else to do? Is there something more coming? Is there something that we have to be aware of if it actually succeeds?
Not really. The mechanism is quite simple. You have a month of mandatory version bit flipping, assuming miners don't activate it early this month, which they might. It seems unlikely, but they might. August the 7th, roughly, version bits get flipped by miners that don't want to have their blocks dumped by BIP110 nodes. That happens for a month, which forces the activation of the BIP110 logic within the BIP110 nodes. Once that happens, then big op returns and taproot spends that have op ifs within them and a few other little things, or control blocks bigger than 257 bytes and things like that, they become consensus invalid. So they can't be mined into blocks. That cripples a lot of the spammy protocols on top of Bitcoin, and it basically sends a very powerful signal that Bitcoin is not open for that kind of business, and it will change itself as needed if it starts to become out of control. So what that does is it doesn't stop the esoteric use cases. People on day one of BIP110, the first thing they do is they will add arbitrary data to Bitcoin in novel ways that aren't stopped by BIP110. That is obviously a troll's reason to live in life, is to find holes in systems and tell people I told you so. Obviously I expect that, but again, the BIP itself answers the question: does this stop all spam? No, we cannot stop all spam. Literally, BIP110 RDTS stands for reduced data, temporary soft fork. It doesn't eliminate arbitrary data. It just seeks to target the main ways. So that will happen. There will be some spam there. There may be some trolls who decide to, as part of their marketing, I would especially expect this from the wizards, which is, hey, they did a whole fork and now we've got a new protocol that gets around their fork. And the outrage they will cause by that will be very useful for their marketing, of course. But fundamentally, they're going to be limited in what they can do and what they can get from investors, because the more serious things like Citria, which had raised a lot of money, the people they're raising funds from are always going to ask the question, look, we are adding arbitrary data to a network that has expressly told us it does not want this stuff and will change itself in order to stop us from doing this. Why are we spending months writing all the software for a chain that is ultimately going to reject us? Why don't we just use another chain? And the serious investors with the millions of dollars to actually invest in those shitcoins on Bitcoin protocol companies are going to say, look, we're not doing this on Bitcoin, okay? And at the moment, we're seeing, what we're trying to do with BIP110 is to get those people to stop. Because if they can't raise money, I don't care if weirdos are putting, big chunks of data on chain in novel ways. The point is it can't become gamified to the point where they have an whole NFT marketplace with thousands of users filling up every block with trash. If it can be allowed and fostered to grow to that degree, that is when it becomes a systemic issue and Bitcoin becomes genuinely bogged down. All the blocks are much larger than they were ever supposed to be because there's so much witness data. That was not expected when we did the SegWit soft fork with a theoretical maximum of just under 4 megabytes a block. It was never expected that Bitcoin is doing regular transactions would ever make it to that size, because you don't have masses of witness data in a typical Bitcoin transaction. You have inputs and you have outputs, but these fake witness things, like the inscriptions envelope, they have masses of input data and 2 outputs, because it's not a real transaction and they're only moving a few sats. So the whole point is you're trying to say, look, Bitcoin is not open for business for this kind of activity. So a few of you are going to show up and you're going to troll. And I know we're going to have Peter Todd tweet whatever stupid crap he puts in the chain in the first BIP110 block. I know. We expect this. It's acknowledged in the BIP anyway, but the point is you're not going to be able to get massives of investment from serious companies that want to build misguided, parasitic infrastructure that sucks the life out of Bitcoin by using people running nodes because they want to engage in a monetary network, in a sovereign way. You're not using them as free cloud storage for your scam, right? That's going to be a thing that is now, we fought a war, we shrugged you guys off. And more to the point, if the developers in the Bitcoin space and the mining pools say, oh, that's all censorship, no, we welcome this stuff. We've just fought a whole war proving that you guys are not going to be tolerated with that kind of subversion, this ideological subversion of a network protecting its raison d'etre. We're not going to tolerate that anymore. And we are going to filter this stuff out. And if you start working around our filters, you know where that ends up. It ends up with another soft fork. So don't do it. And most of the large businesses in the space that are in a big enough position to be able to facilitate that kind of stuff and route around the network are incentivized to keep Bitcoin stable. And they don't want to keep triggering civil wars by using using holes in the network consensus rules against the network. They're not going to be incentivized to do that anymore. So to answer your question, when BIP110 activates, you're going to see what it says on the tin or the can, a reduction in the amount of arbitrary data added to the Bitcoin blockchain. That's the purpose of it, and that is what you will see. People will constantly point out that spam still makes it onto the chain, but this is called survivorship bias. And it's unfortunately like a solid 30% of humans don't understand this. They lack the cognitive ability to understand that. The fact that RDTS exists means there will be less arbitrary data in Bitcoin. That's all. The arbitrary data that makes it past anyway is not as bad as it would otherwise have been. That's the point. So the analogy Marcellus uses is contraception. Contraception means that less babies are born every year. That's a fact. And people coming along and saying there are loads of babies, so contraception therefore can't work. We're saying that's survivorship bias. It doesn't work that way. You are not aware of the babies that don't exist as a result of contraception because they are not here for us to say they don't exist. They are not there, right? So when a bunch of spam doesn't exist on Bitcoin, there's nothing for us to point to. Winning doesn't look like anything, unfortunately, from the perspective of someone that doesn't have this concept.
That's interesting. Now let's do the flip side of that. What if BIP110 doesn't activate, isn't succeeding, and is kind of like running? Is there another fork coming, and it's just like a matter of time, or is just like we have to deal with higher transaction fees, higher storage needs for Bitcoin, or what is kind of like the bad side in case it doesn't activate?
Abandonment. To be clear and precise, it activates no matter what. If you're running a BIP110 node, it activates by default. The idea of it not activating is an inaccurate way of saying, what if people just abandon it and stop running the client? Or what if the nodes that remain have no economic relevance to the network anyway, so miners don't care about them trashing their blocks? If that were to happen, I think that would be the end of decentralization completely. I don't know of any other manifestation of Bitcoin's immune system and its ultimate decentralized enforcement of the network rules than a movement like BIP110. It's completely organic. It's even socially contagious. People like influencers and respected people, again, like Peter Todd and Adam Back and these like very revered figures in the space, Peter Wooler, Greg Maxwell, all of them have said it's terrible, don't go near it, we'll laugh at you, we'll mock you. The fact that you have people running it anyway in that kind of context tells me that they have no reason to do it. It's like expressing something, if there's a sentiment that is illegal in your country to say, a thought that you're not allowed to think, right? Whatever the political correct doctrine is, whether it's considered racist or Holocaust denial or something like that can get you in legal trouble, right? Or in Germany, I think even if you insult politicians, like you can call the chancellor a dickhead or something, and you can actually go to jail for that. So the point is, that the people saying those things think it's true. because why would they invite that kind of problem for themselves, right? If it's illegal to say 2 + 2 is 4 and you say it, then the only reason you say it is because it's true. If someone says 2 + 2 is 5, then you know they're pandering to a politically correct agenda. There's a very different motivation, and you can see that they're lying, and you know why they're lying. So no one running Bitcoin 10 has any incentive to lie about their motivation for doing it, because they get socially ostracized for it. They get told they're going to lose, and they get told they're causing all these problems. So their motivations, by default, you can assume that they mean it. So the point is, in a context where it would fail, those people, I would presume, would continue doing what they are doing currently. I take them at their word that they mean what they're doing. I think there are plenty of, like, the small to mid-sized people that might say, all right, well, I can't sustain this. I have a business to run, and the chain has unilaterally forked, away from what these guys are doing with their Bitcoin 10. It's ignoring their rule, and it's gone off in its own direction, which is essentially a hard fork away from those nodes. I have to join them. But at that point, this tiny minority of based, red-pilled node runners, these Bitcoin 10ers, that are immune to all of the pressure that hits the rest of the ecosystem, they no longer have control. That would have been a definitive line in the sand moment, right? The people that are not funded by funding, like, who's running Bitcoin 10 again? They're not developers that have grants that come from organizations that they have to satisfy in order to get a renewal of their grant. They are not regulated mining pools. They're not regulated exchanges that are, in so many ways, operate antithetically to Bitcoin. They're venture capital funded. They're risk averse. They have shareholders that will always tell them to do the non-risky thing. All these are corrupting incentives that make Bitcoin work. They are not podcasters. They are not speakers at conferences that are sponsored by thousands of shitcoin companies, and they want to keep all those relationships alive and healthy. They're not industry types. The industry itself is antithetical to Bitcoin's long-term health because it prioritizes stability above everything else. Michael Saylor is a good example. He doesn't want improvements to Bitcoin that will make it better money, and he doesn't want the instability of something like Bitcoin 10, though he's never come out and said that exactly, because all it does is create more volatility, which puts him in deeper hot water, given all the leverage he's in, right? So all these industry players cannot have the influence over Bitcoin that people expect them to have, because they can only lead it down a very stale, captured path, because all of them, by virtue of their size, become regulated and deputized enforcers of the state. The only people that can keep Bitcoin as anarchic, true to its anarchic spirit, are these people that have nothing else to lose and no corrupting incentive. They're just random Bitcoiners that run nodes uncompromisingly. So if they get rejected and they no longer have control over the network like they always have up until this point, then it's now industry coin. It is now a captured crypto asset that has no regard for decentralized movement. The industry went out on its own and said, oh, we don't want the risk of any of this stuff. And we miscalculated the fact that the risk is on our side, and enough of us made the error. Because look, it's very risky for them to deny the fork and to not go along with Bitcoin 10. But assuming they all did, and all of the pools colluded and all the exchanges colluded to reject the fork, not in a formal capacity with a URSF, but just to ignore the rules and to mine a very long chain that exceeded a Bitcoin 10 chain that just ignored the Bitcoin 10 rules. If they actually did that, then they're saying, we don't care about what an organic uprising of node runners did inside Bitcoin. That doesn't matter to us. Then they are Bitcoin. And that's completely screwed up, I think. So I'm not being alarmist when I answer your question that way and I say it's over. There's no decentralization anymore. That's it. And I said to Danny on what Bitcoin did, then there's no more halvings. Because if the miners and the tiny group of very influential businesses in Bitcoin decide what the rules of Bitcoin are, and they don't care what the nodes enforce on them anymore, then why would they give themselves a 50% pay cut every 4 years? They would just tell the world, hey, look, Bitcoin will be more secure with more hash rate if we pay ourselves more. Everyone still has the Keynesian economic mindset where they think inflation can help reallocate resources in a productive way. And the more money miners have, the more secure Bitcoin is, right? That's what people are saying. And they've been pushing that narrative for ages. It's of course not true. But there is, again, you have a developer pushing for that who knows it's politically unpopular at the moment, but also due to network dynamic, not possible. But it becomes immediately possible in a scenario where nodes no longer have the authority. So I'm not saying all nodes running BIP110 is the same as the number of people running it now. I know that we're more likely to have a scenario where the industry forks itself off because it's forking itself off from a minority of nodes rather than all of them. But the nodes that are running BIP110 are the relevant nodes. They are the ones that can be trusted with control in situations like this because they're incorruptible, because they are genuinely decentralized. So that's my opinion about what happens there. It's not about the arbitrary data thing. Yeah, you're going to have malicious attacks. Like someone would spitefully put horrible content in the blockchain out of just pure rage at that point if BIP110 failed. I hate that fact, and I hope it doesn't happen. But I don't think we'll even see that scenario anyway. I think high level Bitcoin will just become indistinguishable from your run-of-the-mill cryptocurrency, where it's run by an industry and it's hoping to get investment from retail, but it isn't a decentralized network of paranoid crypto anarchists that want to separate money from states. It looks the same on the surface, but they are fundamentally conceived utterly in opposition to one another. Bitcoin is not crypto. And if you just have industry capture of the rule set, it just becomes identical. It just becomes another crypto.
Is that in... You've lived through the block size wars. I haven't. I came into Bitcoin afterwards in 2020. How many similarities and what are the differentiations to like what happened with the block size wars in 2017 with exactly that, what we are living through right now?
It was the same sentiment, because back then, if they rejected, or I mean, the dynamic was a little different, but if the UASF people, the equivalent of BIP110 as back then was BIP148, if they didn't get their way, then it would ultimately mean that the control of the network was whatever the biggest mining company in the world would have asserted. So that was Bitmain. Bitmain were the primary opponents of BIP148. They didn't want SegWit, at least not in the way that we were trying to activate it. There's some, I don't know exactly, there was conjecture around their motivations there, the covert ASIC boost being one of them, and it looked like they were set up to do that, and that certainly was a smoking gun around their motivation for not wanting SegWit, because it didn't really make sense. Again, this is like the opposition to BIP110. I'm like, your opposition is incongruent. It doesn't make sense. And this was how it felt arguing for SegWit back then. We were like, ultimately SegWit is going to be a helpful upgrade for Bitcoin. Your opposition to it, based on it making transactions unfairly cheap, which was what they said, doesn't make sense. The Jevons paradox means you ultimately make more money as a result. And you're saying you want big blocks at the same time. Big blocks can similarly be viewed as making it so that transactions fees can drop to almost nothing because there's infinite block space to put them in. Not infinite, of course, but more. So again, there was like a funny smell around, like the industry doesn't want this thing, and their reasons for it don't hold up. They seem to be illogical, which means they are lying or they are just very stupid. That was the perspective of what was going on back then. But it was also, SegWit was being used as a political football in order to withhold from us what we wanted in order to try and get a bargain to negotiate to force bigger blocks. So there was some horse trading attempts being made too. So it's kind of hard to draw a complete one-for-one comparison, but the fundamental dynamic was exactly the same. There are nutcase paranoid anarchists that are running nodes that are telling us they are going to do this no matter what we do, and there's the industry. Back then, the industry was against SegWit. So you famously had Brian Armstrong from Coinbase, you had BitPay, you had Barry Silbert with the New York agreement, you had Bitmain, you had then in parallel, you had Roger Ver and all the Bitcoin Cash people and Bitmain as well, that ultimately their movement split in two because you had SegWit 2x and you had Bitcoin Cash, and they were both big blocker movements, and they kind of split their own movement, which is because these kinds of people are usually egomaniacs, right? Like plebs running Bitcoin 10 are not egomaniacs. They're being told they're morons all day and they just have to deal with it. So back then, all these CEOs got together and they gave us the New York Agreement, and they told us, we are firing Bitcoin Core. We are doing things our way. We are having big blocks. We are going to give you SegWit and you are going to give us big blocks. And the way you're getting SegWit is not going to be a soft fork like you want. It's going to be a hard fork. And they just declared all this, and we said, have fun shaking hands with yourselves. We do not agree to any of this, and we are still doing SegWit. And then we famously wrote their SegWit implementation to be exactly the same as ours. So they basically agreed with themselves that we would give them something in exchange for them giving us something. And we took what we wanted from them and then said, and if you're expecting us now to acquiesce to the part of the deal you made with yourself where we give you big blocks, well, good luck. We're not doing that. And you are not, this is not us backing out of a deal because we had nothing to do with this deal. We are doing SegWit whether you like it or not. That does not come, that is not a negotiation. So again, the parallels really make me feel more optimistic about Bitcoin 10 than I did back then, because back then the industry really was against us. Brian Armstrong, Coinbase, Barry Silbert, Bitmain, Roger Ver, Bitcoin.com itself, like selling, it would eventually go on to fork and all that. And that basically they kind of evaporated into irrelevance very quickly. But the point is we were against the industry, and the nodes won against the industry because the nodes can handle volatility and the industry can't. That's basically the truth of the matter. Right now, it's not industry versus nodes with Bitcoin 10. It's nodes having a fight with Bitcoin Core, who, despite their influence on the code, are very non-influential with regards to other aspects of things. So the industry itself, large miners, large exchanges, are not out here making New York agreements saying Bitcoin 10 is bad and we won't support it and you have to do this instead. They just don't touch it. They don't say a single word about it. They test it in private and they're ready to flip the bit come late July if and when it looks like they can't get away with not doing it. That's basically the scenario we're in. So back then it was the same feeling. Are we going to lose the spirit, the soul of Bitcoin? I like to say nodes are the soul of Bitcoin. Are we going to lose that to an industry capture of these risk-averse, boring VCs that have no interest in, trying to build a parallel extra-legal monetary system? No, like none of these guys are interested in that. They're investing in companies and they want their shareholder. Everything's regulated. Everything's, by the book. They're not interested in those kinds of state-toppling battles, right? And Bitcoin belongs to those kinds of people. So in 2017, they won. And it still belonged to them after that. And UASF, that's why you'll see people wearing a UASF hat to this day, celebrating the Bitcoin 48 movement and the manifestation of decentralized control of unknown people running nodes. And Bitcoin 10 is the same thing. So I think it's the same whole mechanism again, which is why I'm like, why is everyone so incredulous about this? We've done minority soft forks before. It's even the same people. Like Luke was one of the main champions of Bitcoin 48, and he's one of the main champions of Bitcoin 10. I don't understand why we have to go through this learning process again, that this is what Bitcoin's really about, when everyone should already know this. And actually, it's because a lot of the history got whitewashed. A lot of people say that miners decided to activate SegWit without any mention of the incentive that was given to them by Bitcoin 48. And the author of the fork wars or the block size wars by John Beer, aka BitMEX Research, characterizes it that way. He characterizes the Bitcoin 48 nodes as a bluff, which means that you're playing poker with someone, you have terrible cards, apparently, you bluff, pretending you've got a straight flush or whatever, and your opponent decides to fold, even though they know you're bluffing. That doesn't make any sense when they have great cards. That's what the assertion is. It doesn't make any sense. Other people will tell you SegWit got activated not because of Bitcoin 48, just because SegWit had consensus. And then I say, well, then who was the block size war against? If SegWit had consensus, who were we fighting a war against? Apparently no one, because apparently everyone agreed. These are the kinds of attempts to rewrite history. So I'm just answering my own question there. Sorry to do so, about why people think BIP 110 hasn't got a chance in hell when it's being activated by the exact same people, by the exact same mechanism, against an ambivalent industry as opposed to a hostile industry. So I'm like, this seems like a very high likelihood of working the way I would expect. So yeah.
I love that. Really cool. I have one more topic. I hope you have time because we're coming closer to the end of the time. But there is the ocean topic that I also want to tackle. I'm myself in the ocean pool since like a year now, something like that. I don't know. I have 9 miners running. And it's really cool. Like it's not only like for decentralizing, just like I think it's the superior platform and like it's the superior interface and all of that. Why is Ocean important for Bitcoin, completely outside also of this civil war that we are living in?
Thank you for asking and reminding me that I do have a job to do. BIP 110 isn't my job. Ocean is my job. Ocean allows decentralized mining within a pooled context, which is incredibly important because the design of the Stratum protocol, which is an ancient protocol inside Bitcoin, sadly meant that if miners wanted to pool, they had to all go with the master-slave, client-server model, where the pool ran the Bitcoin node and the pool constructed the block templates, and the pool broadcast any solved blocks to the network. This put the pools in charge and made them, for all intents and purposes, the miner. So while they do not do the hashing, they do every other aspect of what mining is. So Foundry is best understood, and Antpool is best understood as a giant Bitcoin miner for the purposes of 51% attacking and censorship resistance and other things that Bitcoin requires. They represent a dangerous level of centralization. They can unilaterally, between the two largest pools at least, decide to attack the network. And the old idea that their hashers would all leave if they did that is not well founded in the modern age, because there's too much inertia. Most of the large companies mining with giant pools like that take a very, very long time to move between different vendors. Their lawyers and their accountants are going to have an absolute nightmare accounting for it. It takes a long time. They have SOC compliance to deal with. Things like SOC compliance make things take a very long time. There's a lot of stickiness now. It's not like it was 10 years ago where miners can go, I don't like this pool, I'm going to move to another one. Because you can't make decisions flippantly like that when you're a giant, 20 exahash publicly traded mining company. They don't do things like that. And whatever pressure it might be on a pool like Foundry to do something antithetical to Bitcoin, that can just be applied to the mining company as well. So all that is to say, the centralization of template construction and node running as it pertains to mining is completely unworkable. It makes Bitcoin PayPal again, because you're just relying on a centralized payment processor. It doesn't affect your HODL exactly, assuming it's deep in the chain, but it does affect your ability to transact in a reliable way without needing third-party permission. Ultimately, if there was one giant miner on the network, we know it doesn't work, because that miner might as well be PayPal. If I want to send you Bitcoins, that miner has to be okay with it. If there are only a dozen or half a dozen, which is about what we have for the purposes of template construction, again, not good enough, because that most of them are going. The problem with Bitcoin is pools coagulate into bigger parent pools all the time, because the bigger a pool gets, the better it works. So miners are always drawn to the larger pools versus the smaller pools. And the bigger a pool gets, the more dangerous it becomes due to the design of Stratum. So Ocean, all that, what Ocean does is it says, okay, we have to make miners do more of what mining is, so that censorship resistance becomes a thing that has to be attacked at the miner level rather than the pool level. And if that becomes the case, we have way more decentralization, right? There are thousands of miners doing what Foundry single-handedly does on Foundry themselves. That's a massive win, because Ocean miners can, and for the most part do, run their own Bitcoin node, construct their own block templates, and broadcast any blocks they solve directly to the Bitcoin network. And what that does is it takes a target off Ocean's back. So even if Ocean was the biggest pool in the world and we were over 51% with the ability to unilaterally do terrible things, if we were just a Stratum pool, that no longer is there, really. Someone can come and coerce us to do bad things to Bitcoin, but we don't have the ability to do anything except remove a Bitcoin address from our Coinbase splits. So we can mess with a miner's payouts, but we can't do anything with regard to Bitcoin itself. So they're still going to be mining blocks. They're still going to be broadcasting them direct to the network. And a coercive 3-letter agency or whatever it is you want that might go after some sort of Bitcoin company, all they have to go on, because Ocean's permissionless, there are no accounts. We don't even know who our miners are. We just know the Bitcoin addresses of miners that are making these naughty templates. So that all they have to go on is we have to figure out who this Bitcoin miner is. And all we have is this Bitcoin address. And you have to play whack-a-mole with that and go after all these different miners doing things. That's why decentralization works, because you need to do things that the state doesn't like if the state has unreasonable rules, but you need to break those rules en masse. You can't just break them as a single entity. If there were thousands of Samurai wallets or equivalents, then they'd have been fine, but there aren't. There's only a couple of people doing stuff like that, so they get made examples of. That's the point. So you have to, that's the benefit of decentralization. That's why that's what anti-fragility requires. So that is the function of Ocean, and then you get the added bonus that it's not an FPPS pool, which means you get lumpier payouts, but you typically earn more as a result because you don't go over the top with variance reduction. You get FPPS pools pay you incredibly consistently, but they charge you a lot for the privilege. Ocean pays you not as consistently, but you get paid overall more, assuming you have low time preference.
Yeah, and I especially love the feature that there is no account needed. I literally just plug in a Bitcoin address and get the Bitcoin there, and I can have as many. I can split them out, split my miners across different addresses. I can put them all on one address. It's really neat. The most KYC-free Bitcoin that you could ever get anywhere else. Really cool. I have one question that I asked every single one of my new guests on the podcast at the end is, what can we learn from you besides Bitcoin?
What can I what? Sorry, I coughed.
What can we learn from you besides Bitcoin? Like, is there that many people go to like family, go to instruments, go to sports, go to like many different things, not just like from you personally, but also something that the knowledge that you hold. I don't know.
Thank you. So other things about me, I'm a Christian, and I believe that our goal is to be incredibly disciplined and to not deceive ourselves. All deception is self-deception, and I would advise people to be very honest with themselves and make sure they're not engaging in self-delusion, because that is a cascading spiral of misery that ends in a very dark place. And we live in a world that has perfected the psychological techniques needed to try and make people fall for these traps. So advertising and narratives coming from corrupt government institutions and things like that, they are all over the place, and they are incredibly pervasive, and you are obligated for your own health and safety, and for the health and safety of people around you that you love and care about. Do not be deceived. Make sure that you assess things being told to you and narratives being thrown at you, and the things you are being told to think about and have strong opinions on. Make sure that you can pick up on the fact that they might be inauthentic and some sort of game and trick that's being played on you. Be very vigilant. There is a war for your mind, and make sure that that your thoughts are your own. That's my life advice. If that gives you anything helpful to end the show with.
I love that. That's really, really cool. We have an end routine in the podcast where the previous guest is asking a question for the next guest without knowing who the next guest actually is. And the previous guest asked you the question, because he got to know who you are. I usually don't tell, but I told him, has your view on psychedelics changed because he knows that you were against them?
My view on psychedelics, I was not against them exactly. I do credit them with actually helping me a lot in my life. I think there was a podcast I did with Svetsky like a long time ago where we were taking shots at them. My advice on are you still there? Your screen has disappeared.
Oh yeah, I'm still here. For
Okay.
whatever reason, my screen disappeared.
All right. Yeah.
I switched to the backup camera.
All right. Nice. My opinion on psychedelics is that they are medicine, but they are fun. And the problem with fun medicine is that people start pretending they're sick when they're not. That's like cannabis is medicine, but people smoke every day. And I'm like, if you're taking medicine every day, then you don't even want to get better at this point. Like the whole point of like, so these ayahuasca retreats and places like that people go to, I'm like, this is a hospital. You're not supposed to spend your life in hospital. You go there to get better and then you go back and live your life. That's the point. And people get stuck. And I always felt it was like Narnia. Like you go there, you walk through the wardrobe or whatever, and you're like in a magical land. And it's like you have a life, you have children, like go home and live your life. Like, yes, you've been through trauma, childhood, all that stuff. The point is to like go in with an intention, be like, I have an issue around this, and go in, do whatever psychedelics you want to do, fix it, be honest with yourself about whether you've made progress or not, and then leave. That's it. That's my opinion on this stuff. It was just a warning for people not to get stuck, because some people just use it as a way of running away forever. And I'm like, that's really tempting, because it's not, no one's going to do it with chemotherapy because it's horrible, but you will do that with LSD and ayahuasca and stuff because they're fun. So I'm like, you have to like put it in its appropriate box. That's all. And I'm never going to discount the healing abilities of psychedelic stuff. It's real. A lot of people get, it's also a way to open yourself up to some awful corrupting stuff too. And there's a dark side to the whole thing, and you have to be candid with yourself about that too. So again, do not be deceived. They are a mixed bag, and be careful what you do. So I definitely have a nuanced perspective on psychedelic drugs, and but I don't think it's like they are the cure for everything. And the government hates it. That's why they're illegal, because they're so good for humanity. It's way more complicated than that, and you need to be responsible about it. So very interesting question. I really don't want people to think I'm telling them it's all bad and it's all demonic and you're going to go and get one-shotted by a 9-dimensional alien in the Peruvian rainforest and all that stuff. Not saying that, but it does come with a bunch of risks as well. And I've seen people just get lost, just completely lost. And I'm like, dude, there's nothing even wrong with you. What are you doing here? Just go home. Like, and that can be a terrible thing to witness. So yeah.
I like that. Really based. Loved it. Really cool. Before I let you go, where can people find you, ask you questions, and maybe also where can people, if they want to learn about the whole thing that we talked about today, BIP110 knots, where can they find more information on that, or where's a good starting point for that?
Yeah, bitcoinknots.org is where you can download the Knots client. Most people would run it on something like a Start9. Big shout out to Start9, Matt Hill. Fantastic node in a box implementation, and then you get the extra Lightning nodes and block explorers and things like that you can put on top of them without needing to configure them. Ocean.xyz is the company website for the mining pool. That's how you can earn more money and make your own block templates than other pooling solutions. And you have completely transparent stats as well. So, I'm obviously on Twitter, which is at Grassfed Bitcoin. You can reach out to me there as well. DMs are always open. I'm very happy to interact with anyone. And yeah, those are pretty much the good places.
Now my camera is back on for the ending. Thank you so much, Bitcoin Mechanic, for being on the podcast, and also thank you so much for everyone that is watching and listening, for joining us for this. Always, I'll be back.
this content is for educational and entertainment purposes only and does not constitute financial advice.